We're here at NABS with Dave Levy and John Castellano, and we are going to talk about this rather splendid titanium mountain bike, which is a project on which both Dave and John have collaborated. And Dave, would you like to just talk us through briefly the general concept of the bike and the parts on which you've collaborated with John?
So what I have here is the latest version of a bike frame we call the KGP. So I started building flex stay bikes in the 90s when I just thought it was an interesting way to be able to make a full suspension bike, limit the number of pivots, and I always felt like having a non-pivoting chainstay made the bike feel more like a hardtail, but it allowed me to create traction similar to what you would have with a full suspension bike with pivots on it. In that day, I built bikes that had 60 millimeters of travel at the most, and was always a little concerned about what would happen for longevity. Figured that eventually things would fatigue, but they would last long enough. When I met John a couple of years ago and we started talking about his plate design, I got engaged and interested in being able to resurrect that design. I always liked the way it worked with John's guidance, and actually being able to do real FEA analysis to be able to prove that this was going to work and not fatigue. I got really excited after bending his arm a slight amount, talked him into being able to do a 27.5 plus size plate and boost rear end, which is what we have on this frame. In the end, we end up with a full suspension bike that has approximately 80 millimeters of travel at the rear wheel, an axle path that is being controlled by a rocker at the top to be able to make it so that we can maintain a specific path that I believe is going to be more desirable as far as being able to counteract the chain tension and still have a very active feel at the back end, and makes it a very simple and compact setup at the bottom end, and the full ball bearing set of pivots at the top end for durability. The project was really interesting for me to work with John from the standpoint of helping me understand how stresses actually accumulate and how they're dissipated by very minor changes in the shape of the plate itself. So it was a really good learning experience. John's been super kind as far as helping me understand that. I've got a lot of seat of the pants understanding of how things are done, how things work, kind of an intuitive understanding of how the metal works because I've been working with titanium for 29 years. But to be honest, I never really understood the specific details of why something worked, why something failed, and why things last. So that's been a fascinating process. And maybe John can tell us a little bit about what it took to actually design these shapes, because I had no idea what it was going to take to be able to get this plate to work and to continue to work.
John, you've brought along a sample of the plate. Would you hold it up so that we can see it in the camera here, and I'll zoom in on that. And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about integrating it into this bicycle project and the conversations that you had with John, with Dave, along those lines.
So I've been working with this design also since the 90s, although the first flat plate chainstays were in the 1890s. The ones I made, the early ones, had a little under 2 inches of travel, 44 millimeters of travel for the Ibis silk tie. And since then, I've been working on progressing the design. It's easy to get that much travel out of it, but as you want to get more travel, you have to do more and more engineering on it. This particular one is iteration number 98 since those earlier bikes. Basically on the plus, to fit the plus wheel, it turned out to be very challenging because as you move the right chainstay outward, this whole area in here gets very highly stressed. So I spent most of the time right in this area changing where this aperture is. It used to be on this side. I had to flip it over to this side to pull, so it has some support from the other side. And then all little tiny tweaks in the shape of the openings control how the different stress concentrations hook up. And it's a pretty fascinating process. You learn a lot when you're doing this. And so this is the first batch of them, but I'm offering this to other builders. I'm not building frames myself anymore, but these are available to other builders, and as well as my disc mounts.
And Dave, would you tell us a little bit about how this bike rides with the flex plate in it compared to a bicycle that has tubular chainstays?
To be 100% honest, I have no idea. This just got built for the show. I haven't even written this yet.
I have a prototype I rode for 2 years before this latest development with 84 millimeters of travel.
So what did you observe as a difference between this and the tubular chainstays?
The main difference is getting rid of the pivots. You have no slop in the pivot, no play, no wear, no maintenance. My wife's been riding the same bike for 13 years. It's never been taken apart.
And her bike has the flex plate in it.
Yes.
So and I believe that what we're going to find is that there isn't going to be a noticeable difference in the way it's going to feel. The ones with the tubular stays on it had a very solid feel. It felt very much like a hardtail. Like John says, it feels hooked up. You don't have the movement of the pivot. You don't have the play of the pivot. This should have a similar feel, and my expectation is it's going to be not noticeable because it's going to be laterally rigid, just because there's more material in the stressed plane laterally. So from that standpoint, my expectation is I'm not going to notice any difference at all because it's just going to feel more like a regular bike.
And so what's been your incentive to include this chainstay in this bike? Because you're obviously very successful with the bikes that you've already been making. Why would you want to introduce a new product like this?
Well, back in the 90s, when I was building the FlexStay bikes, it was my flagship bike. And I spent a lot of time playing around with suspension design. Had a production bike that we did with a semi-unified bottom end on it. Spent a lot of time kind of trying to figure out suspension design. At a certain point, I realized that I'd never be able to keep up with the design process with suspension. It takes me, because I'm building bikes and I'm pretty much a one-man show as far as the engineering piece of it. It would take me 2 years to be able to go through to come up with a concept for a design, build a prototype, try it, or actually, build a prototype, do all of the basic CAD work to be able to figure out how to make it work, build a prototype, ride it, refine it, ride it, refine it, figure out what was going to hold up as far as the pivots, etc. And all of the big guys would go through that process in a matter of 6 to 9 months. So they'd have the next iteration out. I would be going through and proofing the one that I had just finally done 2 years ago, and just realized there's no way I could ever keep up and actually make a living at it. So my approach at that point was to just do what everyone else does and figure out someone else to work with. So my full suspension bikes, I ended up working with the VPP setup from the guys at Santa Cruz helped me out. So when I had people that wanted full suspension bikes, we could go through and just basically get a rear end from them, go through and put the VPP mark on it so that there was no confusion about whose design, whose technology it was. And so to be able to actually work with John and use one of the concepts that I always thought was really good, and to be able to bring that into kind of the current design. I think the increase in travel is critical. There was a time when 60 millimeters was considered more of a cross-country racing standard, and then everything had to be at least 4 inches, and then you couldn't ride a bike that didn't have at least 5 inches, and then you would die if you didn't have 6 inches, and blah, blah, blah. So I didn't feel like I wanted to chase that one. With the advent of the bigger cross-section tires, and now that you've got a really great selection of lightweight 3-inch wide tires with a 27.5-inch wheel, all of a sudden I think 80 millimeters of travel is functional again, because you've got a tire that's going to run at 12 or 15 pounds. It's going to be able to move another inch. You're going to have great traction. And it seemed like it was viable and the time was right to be able to go through and bring back the concept, and with John's help, to make it so that we can do something that is increased travel and also with the real engineering behind it. So it's not just me scribbling something on a napkin and then drawing it up in a CAD program and building it and seeing if it fails. John can create a virtual world where we can really test it and make sure that it's going to be something that's going to be functional. And I'm super proud to be able to work with him and to actually have his experience and his very specific expertise to be able to make it so that I've got a product that I'm proud of and engineering that's behind it that John can.
And John, as just to wrap up here, you've been around for frame builder world for several decades now, and you told me earlier you had something that you wanted to say about NABS and being here at NABS.
Yeah, well, I also wanted to say it's been a real pleasure working with Dave. He's an amazing guy. I'm involved with him. And about the show in general, the amount of creative energy in this room blows my mind every time. And I want to thank Don Walker for bringing us together, or bringing the tribe together every year, and congratulate him on 15 years.
It's been a great show. So hopefully we'll have another 15 if we're still alive.